Firstly, I really want to say a huge thank you for 50,000 subscribers. This has been like amazing, and I really do appreciate every single one of you, especially those of you who have been around for a while. I love seeing names I recognize all the time. It's so good. My goal for this year is to double that, so here's hoping I could eventually get a plaque to put on this wall. Anyway, education is the great equalizer. But is it really if it's not actually accessible to everyone? And what about that snobbery attached to where you study? A UNESCO study actually found over the last 20 years, the higher education, HE, gross enrollment rate worldwide almost doubled, going from 19% to 38% between 2000 and 2018. Men's enrollment increased from 19% to 36%, while women's enrollment went from 19% to 41% from 2000 to 2018, becoming the main beneficiaries of increased access to tertiary education worldwide. So everything's coming up roses, right? Well, that showed the enrollment rate, not the completion rate, and the study itself actually shows a myriad of different issues in it. I'll, of course, as usual with all of my sources, have it linked for you down below. We've all seen the report showing the earning power after attending higher education, and it's not exactly that revolutionary. It's not exactly class changing, which is one of the main reasons that people even go to higher education to begin with. Don't lie, I talked about this last time. And we also have the fact that people aren't even able to afford this higher education that they're told that they need just to be able to get a basic entry-level job. Higher education was seen as the meritocracy golden ticket, but the fact that everybody is being pressured into getting degrees and going into higher education has actually only increased the disparity between the rich and the poor, and also created a bit of an ableist divide. Now, I stress this all the time across my videos, but everybody has a different lived experience. It's one of the main reasons I actually do these surveys to begin with, to help inform these videos, to actually try and create these sorts of conversations so we can actually unpick like the different systems in place which help or hinder people. You know, it's not someone's fault if they come from a rich family who are able to actually pay for their education. Same as it's not people's fault if they're born into a poorer family who weren't able to actually support them, that weren't able to get them into all of the amazing extracurricular activities. And we're also not going to be shaming people if they dropped out of higher education, because I don't think that's helpful at all. I even hate the term dropout because that has such negative stigma around it. You know, people have to leave higher education for a myriad of different reasons, be they financial or medical or just even figuring out that this isn't the right path for you and deciding to leave. I think that people changing their mind is a completely okay thing. But apparently, no, you're a dropout, so you're a failure. I don't like any of that, so that is not what this video is about, okay? So let's not attack each other. This is the first video in a two-part series where we're going to be talking about the following things. You lovely lot you. The pipeline to higher education, financial issues working against people without privilege, financial aid, scholarships, and the inflexibility of aid, and familial expectations and pressure. And in the second video, we're going to be looking at ableism in education, the job market and usefulness of higher education regret, higher education's purpose if paid for by the state or the self, and the notion of everyone should go to higher or tertiary education. So whatever isn't covered in this video will be talked about in part 2. Huge thank you again to everybody that participated in the survey. There were 520 of you in total, and it was a big survey, so massive thank you. If you ever do want to participate in my surveys, I post them in my community tab, and the best way to keep updated is to be subscribed and also hit that bell notification. And if you follow me on Instagram, I share them in my stories like very often, so then people don't miss out on participating. So yeah, follow me over there as well. It's always in the doobly-doo down below. I'm probably going to be relying a lot on B-roll in this video and me painting because I can't hear out of this ear right now. I'm dealing with many issues. I've had this fun little thing with Rona where every single nerve ending in every single one of my teeth, I feel it and it's in searing pain. It's made things very uncomfortable. So it's like, I feel like this diagram, but in this. It's not been fun. So just a friendly reminder, please keep masking up and getting boosted, as I've talked about before.
What are your backups?
I don't need backups. I'm going to Harvard.
Let's get started by looking at you. So I asked where you're from, specifically where you studied, be it high school or higher education. 45% USA, 8.7% UK, 8.5% Canada, 4.6% Australia, 4.6% Germany, 2.9% Aotearoa, New Zealand, right here, 2.7% Netherlands, 2.3% Ireland. And there were many countries from around the world fitting under the 2%, with a majority of those being in European countries, followed by South American countries and then African countries. As usual, there's a heavy leaning on the USA data here, but like half of my subscribers are from the USA, so it does kind of make sense. But there's also more of a Western leaning front, as you can tell, because barely any Asian countries actually participated in this. So we're looking at kind of a Western view of education in this video. I also asked what year range you graduated in, whether that was from high school or from higher education. 32.9% were 2021 to 2023, bearing in mind there were actually a lot of people who are still in higher education that participated in this survey, so that's giving this more of a heavy leaning. 32.7% 2016 to 2020, 19.8% 2011 to 2015, 8.7% 2006 to 2010, 3.3% 2001 to 2005, 1% 96 to 2000, 1% 1990 to 1995, 0.6% 1980 to 1989. So we really have a skew of recent experiences here. Like, I did initially want only people that had graduated and were in the workforce to actually participate in this survey, but this just gives us an opportunity to have a look at what things are currently like a little bit more. So yes, I understand that my audience is young, but luckily there are so many data points that we can actually pull from to be able to get a comparison to how education was in the past, especially financial wise. I wanted to make sure that I included high school graduation in here for people that didn't go to higher education, because I know that for me, I graduated high school in 2007, the end of 2007. And does anybody remember what that was? The global financial crisis, the GFC, and it greatly impacted workplaces everywhere. It meant that job security was an all-time low. It meant that even getting into the job market was incredibly hard. So that I know that for me and my peers, going into higher education was seen as the thing to do because it would help give you the edge. It was all very well intentioned by sending all of these millennials off to higher education so that you at least had something, because so many jobs were just being completely cold.
Look at the large red circles around various parts of your paper as friendly reminders that to err is human, and that here at Chilton we try to beat that humanity right out of you.
Now, I need to establish something that people outside of the USA may not know, but there's this thing called prep schools, and I thought that a prep school was a school that you went to after high school but before college or university, which was just for rich kids. Or it was a school that rich kids went to after school, like after your regular school day ends at like 3, so then you could prepare to go to university. That's what I thought it was, but no, it's kind of like a private school, but it's basically all aimed on getting these kids into higher education. For a fictional reference point, I know that most of you are millennials, so you'll have definitely seen Gilmore Girls at least like 5 times, at least if you're like me, who actually has the box set. But Chilton is a prep school, okay? Private schools definitely exist all around the world, but prep schools are specifically for getting the kids into the best schools. They are incredibly selective about students. They want to make sure that the students have the right fit, and yes, they do cost a lot of money as well. I want to highlight the desire right from birth, heck even beforehand, like look at the Mozart mummies, for a child to go to a good university, often labelled as their best chance in life. But this is all done before the kid can even demonstrate things they're interested in, academic, artistic or athletic strengths. The prestige of the university acceptance is a key driver here, and divides the haves from the have-nots right from the start. High schools and secondary schools, you'll definitely have seen people like Googling the best high school to go to, and university acceptance comes up so often as like one of the key determinants of what makes a really good school. So is it really any wonder why the schools, the teachers, the faculty are all trying to kind of like pressure, encourage, have this expectation that kids will go to university, because it really does help the school out to have a higher acceptance rate to university. So I asked you about this. In your high school experience, was there encouragement to attend higher or tertiary education to the point where that's the expectation? Select the most relevant. 45.8% yes, teachers brought it up all the time to everyone. 4.4% yes, career advisor took no interest in people who didn't quote qualify or want to go to higher or tertiary education. 16.3% yes, the school prided itself on its university or higher education acceptance stats. 6.9% sort of, teachers prioritized kids who were going to higher education or had the potential to. 10.4% sort of, messaging around you're not living up to your potential if you weren't aiming for higher education was common. 6.2% not really, focus was on things like attendance or participation and kids trying in school. And then there were a number of others which kind of fell into these categories. A lot of you were saying, can I put all of the above? In Germany, their schooling system is sort of similar to what I brought up in my last video with the whole secondary modern thing, but theirs is a little bit more complicated than that. There's a test that kids do in the 4th grade to determine what secondary school they go to. Hauptschule and Realschule are less academic. Realschule, more practical secondary school for grades 5 through 10, is for those that didn't do well on that. Gymnasium is for the kids that are expected to go to university. But basically, unless you make it into gymnasium, university just isn't an option for you. And a number of you are actually raising the difficulty of actually changing schools after you've actually gone through that process. But the thing is, this testing happens when you're 9 years old. And it's my same issue when it comes to the secondary modern thing, because when you're 9, like, if you're actually going through hardship at home or whatever, like I definitely was, I couldn't read a book at that time. Like, I was dealing with a lot of trauma. And so they wanted to, like, put me into special education classes and stuff. But it was actually just my trauma that was affecting my learning, plus dyslexia that they didn't pay any attention to. So I really worry about these kids whose future gets determined when they're 9 years old.
Worker. Soldier.
Plus, migrant children are actually penalised more at this point as well, so there's a hell of a lot of racism to actually deal with here too. Now, apprenticeships, in my opinion, are a fantastic thing, honestly. However, from what you were sharing with me, was this general snobbish attitude, like this looking down upon of apprenticeships, even if your schools were actually trying to encourage people to look at things that weren't just based on going to university. But it's all about the classism, all right, babe? Because think about it, right? If you actually go into an apprenticeship and then you start your own electrician or plumbing business or building business, you can be raking in the dough. You can make so much money, even more so than people that actually go to university, and sooner, to be honest with you. However, no, that's blue collar work. We value book smarts and the right kind of money, okay? Honestly, this makes no sense to me and it really does bother me, but there were a number of you who were saying that your teachers were really encouraging people to look elsewhere, not just fixated on university, which is something that I love to see. Of course, we're dealing with 520 different people's like responses here, so it's going to be a myriad of different things, but yeah, overall, it really was like higher education is the only way, and it's like, that's not the only path, okay? It's not just two paths, there's a myriad. Here in Aotearoa, our previous Labour government were actually emphasising how great apprenticeships were, and they were trying to encourage school leavers to go into apprenticeships. We have a skill shortage here, big time. And the thing is, they were even incentivising businesses to take on apprenticeships, which is a really great thing. And now we have a like scary right-leaning government, so that's probably all going to go. But it was a really, really good thing. We need people of all sorts of skill sets and interests to be able to actually have a well-functioning society, but this emphasis is always on book smarts. Am I saying that I want people to like not be interested in expanding their minds? No, but I also just do not like the snobbery that comes from people that do manual labour as being a bad thing. It's not. You wouldn't live in your house unless it was built by people, okay? For some of your schools, the focus really was on just trying to get kids to actually turn up and participate, which is like a big hurdle, especially in more impoverished areas where kids are actually like needing to work to be able to like support their families. So I fully get it. And in a way, it's almost like they've just given up hope on these kids with the fact that they're not trying to encourage or pressure in a way to go to higher education. It's almost like, oh, well, your future just sucks. That's it.
You're not very pretty, and you're not very bright. I'm so glad we had that talk.
It's a weird thing to try and wrap your head around, but hopefully you pick up what I'm putting down here.
You know, one of the prettiest sights in this pretty world is the sight of the privileged class enjoying its privileges.
University hasn't historically really been a poor man's place. I say man because the first woman to actually get a diploma in the USA, Elizabeth Benson, was in 1840. It took Australia until 1881 for women to be able to enrol in all of their courses. And in the UK, even though women were actually allowed to participate in the exams, they couldn't actually get a degree until 1878. So getting back to where the rich people enjoy their privilege, historically it really was only rich people who could afford the time to be able to go into study to, you know, further their minds and seek something else, because the rest of the kids actually had to work in the family's business, or to be able to actually go off and work to support themselves, or to be able to work to support their family. Like, there is such a privilege to be able to have the financial freedom to have the time to further your mind and aim for something higher. But you could work to be able to afford study before though, right? Well, yeah, technically you could. You know, Isaac Newton, yeah, he was actually a servant to his rich peers to be able to afford his higher education, but he was definitely seen as a second-class citizen there, which is still something which is faced by people today.
Hey, did you just throw your trash on the floor in front of him?
He was already sweeping there.
Oh, so you just bounce your little breakfast wrapper on the ground instead of carrying it to the trash like a normal person? What the is wrong with you? He's not your goddamn servant.
It's not a big deal.
Elizabeth Warren actually talks about this a lot. She paid for her public university degree by working a summer job in 1970. However, you can't really go getting a summer job and then just paying for your whole university year anymore. That's not really a thing in the USA, nor in Australia, nor here in Aotearoa, nor many other countries around the world. In all of those countries mentioned, the cost of higher education has increased massively over the past 50 years. However, the way that the USA has actually tackled this is just to increase the amount of debt that people can go into in order to be able to afford to go to university. When you actually think about it, this has only incentivized universities to increase their pricing. It doesn't make any sense to me. In the USA, according to the National Center for Education Statistics, for the 1970 to 71 academic year, the average in-state tuition and fees for 1 year at a public non-profit university was $394. By the 2020 to 2021 academic year, that amount jumped to $10,560, an increase of 2,580%. During the same period, tuition and fees at private institutions jumped by a similarly astronomical 2,107%. To afford tuition in 2020, public university students must work 6 times as many hours as students did in 1970. And in 2020, if you worked 40 hours a week at a summer job, you couldn't pay for even half of your tuition for the year. You'd have to work 24 hours a week to be able to even afford that. And the thing is that working while studying is actively discouraged. Extremely inflexible, especially as a commuter student, it is physically and mentally taxing to go to school alongside work and other responsibilities. Most professors expect 100% availability with little room for excuses of flexibility, but it is also impossible to attend university and not work or have other responsibilities unless you're very wealthy. On top of car expenses and books and supplies, I had to miss work to attend exams and classes, which meant less money earned. And from your responses, it was incredibly hard getting your professors or your universities to even care about the fact that you had to work to be able to try and afford all of the expenses that are actually involved with university. It was not flexible at all in my experience. Many friends and myself had bad experiences. Whether it came to costs, predatory loans, or issues during the semester, nothing was really there to help. My roommates had a professor who said that this class is more important than anything. You have to quit your job to pass, and I don't care if your mother dies. You can't skip. I had a similar professor say the same thing when a classmate's grandmother died, saying sometimes a semester just has to go bad when she asks for an extension. Working while studying is seen as a distraction as opposed to a necessity, and it's like, yes, Karen, it would be wonderful if people would be able to study and then not have to work on the side to be able to afford food and rent and all of the other things that come into just living. Luckily, we don't have to pay to breathe just for now, but I'm sure one day. But the reality is that a lot of people have to work while studying. The people who don't know how to game the system because they aren't born into families that have got a whole bunch of university behind them where they have all of this experience, or you don't know that from the age of 3 you're meant to be gaming the system to be able to go to university. And if you don't know that stuff, there's not very much to be able to help you understand the ins and outs of this, so you're sort of just left without a paddle. In the high status universities, legacy matters. It's all about having the right fit, but it's not exclusionary, no, because it's based on meritocracy, right? Because if the poor people were actually smart enough, then they'd be able to get into the school. But that's not really true though, is it? We know that all of the college admission scandals, we know that there's all of this legacy stuff, and there's so many things which happen behind closed doors to make sure that the right people are actually getting into these high echelon universities. It's not the rich kids' fault they have access to great tutors and connections to impressive extracurricular activities and charities. It's not their fault they have access to great technology from the start of their life, and a home life where they don't have to look after other kids or do the chores like cooking, cleaning, washing. And you're right, it's not their fault. Just like it's not the poorer parents' fault for the fact that they have to rely on their kids to actually participate in stuff at home to be able to make sure that people are looked after. It's not their fault that they have to rely on their kids to look after the other kids because that is the only support system that they have. It's not their fault that they don't know the ins and outs of like the very convoluted way to be able to get money to be able to go to university. It's not their fault either. However, one of these kids is able to actually go to an Ivy League university because their parents are legacy status members. However, this other kid is stuck like feeling lucky if they're able to actually go to a like local college, and even that is a huge struggle for them. But this is all based on meritocracy, right? So really, like if that poor student had actually tried harder, they'd be able to do the same thing. This is all the meritocracy myth. We all understand this. This is just privilege at play, and it really does continue to divide the haves from have-nots. I know that people can really prickle at the word privilege, but it's actually not negative to just recognize the fact that you've got a bit of a leg up. Like, I know that I do because I'm white and I'm cis, like, and I'm blonde even. Like, as much as people try and like degrade me for the fact that I'm blonde, I know that it still gives me a huge leg up, okay? After the college admissions scandal, they interviewed a bunch of kids that were legacy students and a bunch of kids that were like definitely working class, like they were trying to work their way through stuff and they were in huge debt.
I think at first I was very like, oh, I'm so unsurprised. And then the next day I was like, no, I'm actually really angry. I think the anger took a while because it was so funny.
One of these privileged kids actually just called it just like it is.
But in terms of, is this meritocratic and is this fair? Did you quote unquote deserve to get in? I don't see a huge difference. Both of them are unfair to people who don't have those resources.
I'll have it linked below, but you see what I mean? It's not a negative thing to actually recognize that there is privilege at play here. Financial privilege really comes into play when we're looking at further study, because whilst there are countries where you can actually attend the first few years of college or university for free, when you go into further study, you have to start to pay for all of that yourself. But there's this thing called placements, which you may or may not be aware of. Many professional courses such as nursing, teaching, social work, psychology, and the allied health professions have significant work placement requirements. For example, social work students need to complete 1,000 hours, nearly half a year of full-time unpaid work experience to graduate. This article is from Australia, however, this is a very similar situation to what we have here. Our 2022 research has shown how the financial hardship and stress can stop students completing their degrees. It can also prevent people even considering university study, especially those from socially disadvantaged backgrounds. In the UK, people are offered bursary for things like social workers so they can do placements. There are other options to fix this, like actually paying people to do the work that they do. However, a lot of these businesses don't actually have the funds to do that, and they kind of rely on this unpaid labor of these interns to be able to get the work done, which isn't right at all. So who should be paying for this? Could it be governments? It could well be, especially if these are jobs that we actually want people to have. Or we could actually change the way that placement is done entirely. I'll link the article below. Like I said, everything's linked. It goes much deeper into this issue.
I think you're pushing yourself too hard. I made out a schedule. Every single moment of every single day from now until graduation is accounted for.
I just received this letter saying that my daughter did not qualify for financial aid. Rory Gilmore? Okay, yes, we did recently receive $75,000, but here's the thing. That money is gone. I gave it to my parents, so I don't have the money anymore. It just seems like it shouldn't count. There must be something we can do. Well, we'll just have to figure something out.
Financial aid, scholarships, and the inflexibility of aid. In order to get financial aid in countries like the USA, you have to meet a certain threshold, but that's not a very clear threshold. Like, your entire family gets kind of evaluated based on all sorts of moving numbers and stuff, so you don't really know exactly what the lower limit is to be able to actually qualify for financial aid or how much financial aid you're going to get. It's very convoluted over there. I asked how people paid for their higher education. This is just for the tuition. 13.1% no payment needed, free higher education in my country. 1.3% no payment needed for the first few years, free in my country, but debt accrued after that for further study or qualifications, e.g. a PhD. 5.8% scholarship paid for everything, 8.8% scholarship partially paid, accrued some debt, 17.5% parents or caregivers paid for me to attend, 12.1% parents or caregivers helped me pay for some, debt or I worked for the rest, 3.8% worked while studying so left without debt, 3.8% worked while studying so had debt despite that, 20.4% student loan, 7.5% NA, high school grad, 2.1% financial aid paid for everything, 3.6% 0.7% financial aid paid for some, I topped up with help from family or me working. I really wanted to actually separate the living expenses from the education itself, because as you can see, the education itself already puts people into debt. Free higher education absolutely does make a difference, but from my respondents, it only made a difference to 13.1% of them. And with 17.5% of people having parents pay for everything, it's not really like everyone's coming from a cushy background here, is what I'm really pointing out. The most common response was 20.4% of people getting a student loan. Then I asked, if you've done higher or tertiary education, how did you cope with living expenses? Select the most applicable. 20.6% lived with parents or caregivers, which covered rent or food. I paid for other expenses. 12.3% lived with parents or caregivers, who paid for everything. 13.8% lived in student accommodation, which parents paid for. 11.3% rented with others, worked to pay for this and expenses. 7.9% lived in student accommodation, went into debt to pay for it. 2.9% lived in student accommodation and worked while studying to pay for it. 0.4% campus housing is free in my country, parents or caregivers pay for other expenses. There were a bunch of others where you rented and like maybe your parents paid for that, or you switched between all of these scenarios. So it was like a real mixed bag of what different people had experienced. And there were 4 of you who joined the military just so you could get free education, which is a whole other kettle of fish I could really get into, because, you know, the military really wants people to be poor so then they can actually find different ways to entice people to actually join the ranks. But I won't get too deep into that today. If you want a video on this, let me know. Something that you brought up often if you got scholarships or financial aid was the fact that there was no flexibility on this. Like, you can't take a term off. If you're going through like mental health issues or family issues, or maybe even just want to change your mind. If you change your mind, all that money could just go straight away. You could just have none of it anymore. And so like you're left with this very rigid structure. It's like, yeah, sure, it's free money, but it has a whole bunch of conditions. It's kind of like, you know, that thing where you're just holding on to it. It's like, but you have to do all of this stuff. It's very conditional money. And I don't know about you, but when you're at the age of like 18 to 25, that's a very tumultuous time in people's lives. And to be able to even qualify to get this sort of aid, you have to kind of put yourself through the ringer. Like, a lot of pressure is put on kids to be able to even qualify, to get the grades, to be able to, you have to work so hard to just get to this point. And people can be burnt out from university, from college, or whatever they're going to. And there's a lot of inflexibility when it comes to the financial aid that people actually get. Now, when I was reading through your responses, I could really tell whenever it was the USA that were actually participating in a wait, because everything was so much more negative in terms of the aid that people got, the flexibility that people got, whereas in European countries, they were way more flexible from what you were sharing. So I don't want to paint this as everything is all bad, because there were actually a number of you were saying how flexible and accessible your university and higher education was. It's just, there are definitely some countries that are better at it than others.
My dream is that you'll grow up and go to college, and then maybe someday you'll build your own castle.
Where do princesses go to college?
They go, where the princes go. They go to Princeton.
Core memories. Each one came from a super important time in Riley's life.
Familial expectations and pressure. I asked, in your family, how common is higher or tertiary education? 36.3% higher or tertiary education is common in my family, e.g. grandparents or other relatives or parents, but not all need to have attended. 26% parents or caregivers attended higher or tertiary education. 11.9% cousins or siblings are the first to attend. 13.1% I'm the first person to attend. 2.3% nobody in my family has attended. There were a lot of others when it comes to this, whether it was like one side of the family has all attended and the other side hasn't, if all of the men in the family had, or if people had like gone on to study later on in life, which is another thing which I'm very pro. I think that people should be able to learn at whatever stage of life they're at, because we should always be learning and growing. I think that's very important, especially considering how fast technology moves along, but we'll be talking about that in the next video. But a number of you are raising that university was not a choice for you. It was something that was an absolute expectation. It's just like, so which one are you going to? I want you to go to these universities. A lot of pressure, especially if you actually were a smart kid.
And I just can't say enough about how proud we should all be of Malcolm for getting into the gifted program. Now, Malcolm may not look different than the rest of us, but he is very different in his brain.
It's like you were letting everybody down if you were a smart kid by maybe not wanting to go to university straight away, maybe wanted to have a gap year. It's like, no, you're going to university, you're going to go to one of these ones because you're smart, you cannot let us down. This is where we really get into the horrible pressure part.
Take it a bit more seriously.
You don't think I know that? You know how much time I spent trying to get in, how many classes I've taken, how many nights I've gotten no sleep? I wanted it bad, but so what? Will I not have a future if I don't go to Yale?
Not as bright a future. You come from everything.
And you expect everything. And anything less is a disappointment.
No.
No, that's what you're saying. The expectations are so high.
No, Yale made it possible for a girl like me who comes from nothing to make something of herself.
So it's Yale or nothing.
That's not what I'm saying.
Then what are you saying, Mom?
There were some of you who are children of immigrants who actually uprooted their whole life to be able to go to another country to be able to give you a better chance in life. And the better chance is actually getting into higher education. So there's a real expectation for children of immigrants to do better. This is a whole other topic which people have talked about themselves, so I will link this stuff for you down below. There's a really, really good piece written by Eden Guterhan for the JED Foundation. And one line that I really like, especially if you're a people pleaser, which I know a number of you are, I'll make them proud along the way, rather than having their pride be the end goal. It's really hard with parents or caregivers because wanting them to be proud of you should not come at the expense of you suffering. Like, that should not be something which is an expectation of you. But sadly, it kind of feels that way because you can't go telling them that you're struggling because they sacrifice so much for you, and it creates this whole vicious spiral. There is so much pressure on kids to always be doing something extra to be able to qualify for getting into a better college, to be able to stand out from the rest of the crowd. There is this real competitiveness where it's almost like you can't trust those around you, which really doesn't bode well for like creating a community sort of based thing. We wonder why we're dealing with loneliness if everybody else has been seen as a threat.
I'm the best of the best. I'm Blair Waldorf.
Assuming that's your way of saying you're the most distinguished, ambitious student at your school, then they're all Blair Waldorfs.
Because so much has been written about university competitiveness and rejection rates, this has had an impact on how parents see things, which then impacts the kids. When it comes to university rejection, the average at the nation's top 51 schools was 35.9% in 2006, but by 2018 it was 22.6%. For the top 10 schools, that stat went down from 16% to 6.4%. People think it's harder and harder to get into higher education. However, what isn't actually noted here is that people have actually been applying to more places over the time, so of course rejection's going to be higher. In 2002, the average amount of places that people were applying to was 4, whereas in 2017 it was about 7. So even though a majority of kids are actually getting accepted to places to go to higher education, there's this real like scarcity mindset where you are pitted against everybody else around you. And this actually has a really negative thing not only on people's mental well-being, but also even on their results. In a 2018 study of 6th graders, not only did children's academic performance not suffer when parents valued being a good person as much or more than achievement, but their grades and teacher ratings were better than the high-pressure group.
You said not to criticize, so not criticizing.
Well, that in itself is criticizing. You know that.
All I know is that I gave up law school and sacrificed my dreams for you. And in New York, you worked in a skyscraper with Audra Levine, and now you are here.
If you are someone that's dealing with a home life of other-oriented perfectionism, which is basically where people are pushing their perfectionism onto someone else. There is a really good article from Salon that I will have linked for you down below. I highly recommend you go and check it out because it will probably help you quite a bit. When a parent sets exacting standards for their child and assumes a critical attitude, it can change how they parent to their child's detriment and leave the parent bitter, resentful, and sometimes even wishing they'd never had children. That's particularly problematic in light of new research suggesting that both parental expectations and parental criticism have been on the rise.
Get into those schools anyway. Mom, you should just go to City College. You know, with your work ethic, just go to City College and then to jail and then back to City College, and then maybe you'd learn to pull yourself up and not expect everybody to do everything.
However, as people have been taught about for generation after generation, higher education is kind of how you can switch class. But that's not actually really the case anymore, though, is it? Families want their children to have the best possible future, so higher education has been known to be the great equalizer. Well, if we're just coming down to, you know, people's knowledge of stuff, then absolutely it could be the great equalizer. But trying to apply this to the real world, I'm sorry, I've got some bad news for you, because we live in a white supremacist capitalistic system, and it kind of maintains the status quo more than anything, and I've got a bit of depressing stuff to tell you, but don't worry, we'll end on a high note, okay? Despite the message of the American dream and education being the equalizer, Gregory Clark says America has no higher rate of social mobility than medieval England or pre-industrial Sweden. That's the most difficult part about talking about social mobility, is because it's shattering people's dreams. Clark crunched the numbers in the US from the past 100 years. His data shows the so-called American dream, where hard work leads to more opportunities, is an illusion in the United States, and that social mobility here is no different than the rest of the world. But that came from 2014, you cry. There's got to be something more recent, right, to disprove this? I'm sorry, there's actually something from 2023 from the UK. Children from most ethnic minority groups on free school meals outperform their white peers in terms of educational outcome. But for a number of ethnic minorities, this advantage is reversed upon entry into the labour market. Men from Pakistani, Black African and Black Caribbean backgrounds who grew up on free school meals end up earning less than the white men who grew up on free school meals. While the educational achievements of ethnic minority children from poor backgrounds are a success story, for many of them this is not translating into higher later life earnings as we might expect, and on average they can rely much less on receiving wealth from their parents than white children. It may be harder now than at any point over the last half a century to move up if you're in a position of disadvantage. Now, of course, there are exceptions to the rule. I'm sure that you're going to be sharing them down below, okay? You know, whether it's from actors to TikTokers to YouTubers to like whoever, you know, pop stars even. Like, look at the Spice Girls. I bring them up all the time, I'm sorry, but it's so relevant still. There are always exceptions to the rule, but we don't hear about the other servants that didn't actually end up going to the ball like Cinderella. We only ever hear the stories of Cinderella. Yes, absolutely. After World War II in particular, and the Great Space Race, like there was a lot of emphasis put on actually getting kids into higher education to be able to upskill whole nations. It wasn't just because they wanted to beat Russia, no, not at all, especially not in the US. So much more help was given during that time, which made a great difference to our boomer parents, who were then able to actually be the first people to actually go to university in a lot of cases, which is amazing. However, it doesn't actually translate to the same sort of outcomes these days. Does this mean that higher education isn't worthwhile? No, not at all. Please don't ever misrepresent me by saying that. However, an equalizer when it comes to class mobility, it's not. It's just not. Does it mean that people shouldn't even try for education? No, not at all. Far from it, because knowledge actually helps us to call out the issues and try and dismantle systems. It's why I'm such an advocate for affirmative action, especially in regards to higher education. Like here in Aotearoa, for example, we've got MAPAs, which is the Māori and Pacific Admission Scheme. However, because there's a lot of racism still in this country, I've definitely overheard people saying, I'll never have a oh, sorry, let me put on their correct accent. I'll never have a Maori doctor because they're less qualified. Part of this is because people really want to hold on to the meritocracy myth, but this is actually being done to actually try and undo the fact that people have been systemically punished and put down, and oh my gosh, people are even trying to undo the Treaty of Waitangi right now. It's like, oh, the politics here in Aotearoa, I tell you, it's getting ridiculous. I think that higher education is really important, and that's another reason why I want it to be accessible to all, so that we can actually have more voices at the table being taken seriously because they've actually got the qualifications to finally have a seat at the table. We need to be able to have more voices heard, more ideas heard, which aren't just from white men, to be able to actually make progress. Okay, so this video has been long enough. I won't even tell you that I've been filming for over 3 hours, but I'm also very sick right now. If you made it all the way to the end, honestly, thank you so much, because when it comes to YouTube pushing my videos out or anything like that, watching to the end, commenting, liking, it makes the biggest difference, because watch time, YouTube knows, and YouTube cares about that. If you did make it all the way to the end, please leave the stack of books emoji. And what book have you been reading or listening to recently? Because I've been listening to Braiding Sweetgrass and I really like it. I took Lena Norm's recommendation, and I'm gonna try and get into more audiobooks this year whilst I'm painting, because I think it's a good thing. Anyway, don't forget to subscribe and come back for part 2, where we dive into the more nitty gritty of all of your responses, because I feel like that's going to be a spicy video, okay? I'll see you next time. Bye.
Do you remember when we spent those 4 amazing hours in the hot tub after winter formal?
Yeah, no.
This is so much better than that!
I know that my hair isn't done today, but like, I showered for you, okay? Like, that takes so much energy right now, and I'm struggling to breathe. I'm gonna lie down. That's what I'm gonna do. Okay. Bye.